All right, well, so good morning. Thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of our local and state and federal partners that are here today to talk about the culmination of a 9-month-long investigation that was meant to disrupt and dismantle some criminal gangs and drug trafficking organizations in our community. Many of you were here last fall when we did an operation here at the sheriff's office where we arrested over 150 gang members, took 78 guns off the street, 23 of which were stolen, and the Orlando Police Department had similar numbers as well. Well, you know, the violence in our community continued, and these criminal organizations and gang members continued their violent activity. So in October, we enlisted the support of the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation, which we were all a part of here in Central Florida, to conduct a longer-term investigation and, again, to dismantle these criminal gangs and organizations. You know, the ongoing feud, you know, that has been going back and forth between these gangs has been responsible for over 30 shootings and several homicides in a number of our jurisdictions. And it has been a little, we've been a little dismayed by maybe some in our community and even some media reports that the folks involved in this activity were rappers and they were just part of a clique. These are violent criminals involved in violent gang activity. You know, this is what the men and women who work for us, this is what they do for a living. So I trust you, trust me when I tell you, we know what these folks are up to. So if you look at that poster, the prominent people at the top displayed there, just between those 8 people, they're responsible for 230 felony charges. Jaquavius Smith, better known as Glock 9, just him himself has been arrested for 52 felonies. So we're talking about dangerous, violent criminals. And when Jaquavius Smith was taken into custody, a search warrant was done on his house. We found 13 sears. Those are mechanisms which will convert a regular handgun or rifle into an automatic weapon. And so I don't have to tell you, if you're able to fire 70 or 8 bullets at a target, the likelihood of innocent people getting caught up in that gunfire dramatically increases, and that's why this operation commenced. You know, and 4 of those cases are highlighted right here, 4 murders in our community. Of course, 14-year-old Joshua Atkinson and 3-year-old Daquan Felix Jr. Those cases still remain unsolved. Our hope is that when the community and even some of these criminals see the breadth of this operation, the people who are going to be going to prison for a very, very long time, that people will come forward and give us tips on these cases. You know, both of them, all of these were gunned down, these innocent victims, by retaliatory gunfire between these gang members. So before I have some of the other members of this organization speak, I just want to say that how proud I am of the work of all of our organizations, you know, state, local, and federal, all came together to arrest these suspects and prevent further violence in our community. And I thanked them all earlier, but the men and women who conducted this investigation put their lives at risk. These are dangerous, violent criminals, and they risked their lives for this community. So we're very, very proud of them, and we thank them for their service. So at this time, I would like to call up Deputy Chief Jose Velez from the Orlando Police Department.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking Sheriff John Mina, State Attorney Monique Worrell, MBI Director Ron Stocker, FBI Assistant Special Agent Ron Hopper, and all of our federal and state partners represented here for the joint work in this effort. These partnerships are critical to eliminating criminal groups impacting the safety of our city. Gun violence exacts a high price. The so-called beefs and slights fueling the senseless gun violence between groups we are discussing today took the lives of both gang members and innocent bystanders. 16-year-old Tavia King wanted to be a veterinarian and had many goals and dreams. She was riding home with friends on May 2nd when she was shot and killed in a gang retaliation shooting that was not meant for her. In less than a month, both Jacarius Simpson and Anthony Barnes were arrested in this case. And now I can update you on a third suspect. Jeremiah Wood is also in custody for first-degree murder. Our detectives believe all three opened fire in the car Tavaya King was riding in. The gunfire from Wood ultimately ended King's life. Also, during the course of the operation we're discussing here today, it was determined that fellow gang member Sonny Thornton concealed 2 of the handguns used in King's shooting. Therefore, Thornton has now been charged as an accessory to felony murder. Another innocent victim was Dexter Rents. A successful football player bound for Louisville, he was killed at the funeral for a mutual friend by rebels targeting gang members in April of 2020. While this case remains open and active, our detectives are very hopeful that news of Operation X-Force and its 32 arrests will convince someone to come forward with more information in this case. However, there's an important update I can share. One of the guns involved in the Rents shooting was later recovered at the home of Jaquavius Smith. Smith has put countless lives in danger in Orlando. As a self-proclaimed rapper called Glock 9, Smith's social media videos have flooded impressionable youth with images celebrating guns, drugs, and violence. Smith is no stranger to guns. He opened fire on a home with people inside in July of 2020. 3 months later, rival gang members tried to attack him inside the Mall of Millenia, forcing an evacuation where fortunately no one was hurt. And in every encounter with our patrol officers, Smith was armed with 1 or more weapons, which is illegal for this convicted felon. The Orlando Police Department is committed to serving and protecting our great city. We're proud to say today's arrests are a significant step in improving the safety of our neighborhoods. However, success requires a balance of disciplined crime fighting and engagement from the community. Gangs rely on allegiances and fear to operate. That's why the Orlando Police Department invests extensively into community partnerships that strengthen relationships, refuse to tolerate crime, and give youth and families access to resources and opportunities on positive pathways. In closing, I want to thank the many detectives, agents, and investigators who risked their lives to arrest these suspects. Your work has made a difference and likely saved many lives. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ron Stucker. I'm the director of the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here today to brief you on this case. We're also very pleased that MBI could assist our local agencies with investigating these violent gang members and investigating the violence that was having an impact on our community. The purpose of MBI is to disrupt and to dismantle criminal organizations or criminal enterprises. Primarily, we are tasked with investigating drug trafficking and human trafficking, but as many of you know, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have put a very special emphasis on violent gangs and for gangs and groups and enterprises that are committing violent crimes and murders. Our local agencies, our sheriff's offices, our police departments do a tremendous job investigating individual specific crimes such as homicide, murder, or drive-by shootings. Unfortunately, the difficulty they run into a lot of times is that witnesses will not cooperate with them. Sometimes witnesses will not cooperate simply because they're intimidated by the gang or they're in fear of still living in their community and coming forward and cooperating with the police. Other times, the witnesses or the victims are loyal or affiliated with the gang members themselves. They will go out there and interview a victim who will simply say, I will take care of this on my own, and will not want to cooperate with them. What MBI does is we try to do specialized investigations that develop these cases without being dependent upon the witnesses to give us that evidence. We use specialized investigative techniques, and we can commit all of our resources for an extended period of time to focus on a criminal organization. One strategy that MBI uses when we investigate an organization of this is to use RICO or racketeering statutes. And we do that because they have very serious criminal penalties, and we believe that that will break the cycle of violence. A lot of times people ask, well, what does RICO or racketeering really mean? In the simplest terms, it is an organization or a group of people that are working together to continually commit crimes. And that's what we saw with these two gangs that we're talking about here today, is that we did our investigation. These gang members were committing crimes on a daily basis. Some of the crimes that they were committing were attempted murder, accessory to the fact after murder, possession of firearms and ammunition by convicted felons, shooting into occupied dwellings, shooting from vehicles, drug trafficking, money laundering, unlawful currency transactions, bank fraud, theft, robbery, aggravated assault, aggravated battery, and possession of automatic weapons or automatic sears. Also during this investigation, MBI became aware of crimes that were going to be committed, and we were able to intervene and prevent those crimes. And some of those crimes were home invasions, drive-by shootings, and retaliation crimes. As you can see on the board, and we'll also have a handout that we will provide you at the end of the briefing today, we have currently charged 34 defendants. 32 of them are being charged with racketeering offenses. 24 of them are either leaders or prominent members of these gangs. This case with these 34 defendants is being prosecuted by the Office of Statewide Prosecution. Attorney General Moody had planned on being here today, and then there was a conflict at the last minute, but she has provided a written statement speaking to her commitment to an aggressive prosecution of these defendants, and that will also be provided to you at the end of the briefing today. During our investigation, we recovered 15 firearms. 2 of those firearms were stolen, and as the Deputy Chief mentioned a moment ago, 2 of the firearms that we recovered during a search warrant are directly connected to the murder of 16-year-old Tavia King. Collectively, we've referred to these 2 gangs as the Army Gang and 438. Army, which was based out of the Mercy Drive area, 438 based out of the Silver Star Road area. But it's important to understand there's also a number of subsets of these gangs, such as KKK, CKN, RCN, and that their influence stretched much further than just Mercy Drive and the Silver Star Road area. During our investigation, MBI served search warrants in Seminole County. We served search warrants in gated communities in Lake Nona, and we served search warrants on the east side of Orange County. We still have evidence that's at our laboratories being analyzed and looked at. This is an ongoing investigation. We anticipate that these defendants and others will possibly be charged with crimes at either the state or the federal level. The vast majority of these defendants that you see in the pictures today are in custody. There's I think about 6 or 7 of them that are still at large. We would ask the public that if they know where these defendants are, to please call the Sheriff's Office or the Police Department. As was mentioned earlier too, there are unsolved murders. If citizens know or have information on these murders or on these crimes, we would ask that they call their Sheriff's Office or local police department. Of course, you can also always call Crime Line at 1-800-423-TIPS. You may be eligible for a reward, and through Crime Line, you may remain anonymous. As I'm closing, I just wanted to thank many of our federal partners that are represented here today, the FBI, ATF, and DEA, who brought federal resources to bear into this. And at this time, as I hand off to Special Agent in Charge Laverne Hibbert from the DEA Miami Field Office, I would like to specifically thank DEA. As I mentioned earlier, for the last 3 or 4 years, MBI has had a significant focus on violent crime and gangs, and the DEA has been involved in every one of those investigations with MBI, providing us financial support, resources, analytical support, and many of these cases would not have been possible without their support. So I'd like to introduce Special Agent in Charge Laverne Hibbert from the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Good morning. My remarks will be brief. I just would like to say that the DEA Miami Field Division which encompasses the Orlando District Office, would like to thank all of our law enforcement partners that are present here today, who have worked tirelessly in this investigation. The level of violent crime that we are seeing today is unacceptable. We had Tavia King become an innocent victim of violence, and so many others. We are devastated for her family's loss. At DEA, we remain deeply committed in our collaborative efforts to combat violent drug trafficking organizations that plague and endanger the welfare of Central Florida's communities. The men and women who work tirelessly in this investigation, the agents, detectives, investigators, the officers, the support staff, all of the management in law enforcement, we are tired and we are always seeking to rid our communities of this violent crime that are taking place. Again, thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Hopper. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI here in Orlando, based out of the Tampa division. About 9 short months ago, I stood right here and I told you that I was going to devote federal resources to help eradicate the violent crime problem down in the Pine Hills area and similarly afflicted neighborhoods across Central Florida. And I would say that the dozens of indictments and arrests that you've seen here today are an example of the fine work of this collective group behind me. When they put their minds together and decide to go after a target or a crime set problem, they go ahead and they accomplish that mission, and we're very proud to be a part of that. This particular investigation actually afforded the Safe Streets Task Force at the FBI a unique opportunity to employ some techniques that we don't typically use in violent crime or gang-style investigations. And while I can't go into those techniques, what I will tell you is in the coming months, you should see several federal indictments coming out targeting the infrastructure that supported the financial part of these gangs, the financial infrastructure, and those that actually helped continue, those things that helped to continue the gang to operate. And so the one thing I would say for the takeaway for all of us today is that gangs think they're smarter than us. They're not. We are smarter, we are stronger, we are dedicated to eradicating any criminal organization that presents itself here in Central Florida, and we're proud to be a part of the collective team that stands behind me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And I think in closing, before we take questions, it's important to note that crime in Orange County is down by 28%. Murders have decreased, compared to last year by 33%. And because of the impact that these ongoing investigations have, we've seen that decrease. And we know that in any community, it's only a small percentage of the people that are committing the crime. So we have a great community here in Orange County and all across Central Florida, and we would encourage you to call in, give us more tips. Again, Crime Line was mentioned, 1-800-423-TIPS. Any of these individuals or other people that are committing crimes in your neighborhoods, and you could remain anonymous. So this time we'll take questions. I would suggest that if you have questions about the investigation, Director of MBI, Ron Stecker, would be most appropriate. And if you have had any broader questions from other agencies' heads, feel free to ask as well.
Probably a question for Mr. Stucker, but whoever wants to answer, go ahead. Can you give us a little bit more background and context to these two gangs? How long have they been in operation? How long have they been feuding with each other? Any idea kind of like how they started, those kind of things?
As far as when they started, I'm sorry, I don't really have that answer. I mean, MBI investigates organizations, and these happen to be criminal street gangs. We know that they are very organized groups, particularly the Army gang, with a very specific hierarchy in which they give direction to subordinate gang members on what to do and what crimes to commit. As the sheriff mentioned earlier, I mean, when you look at what occurred starting maybe last spring, last summer, into last fall, with over 30 drive-by shootings, multiple murders, I mean, we're listing murders up here of innocent victims, but there were murders of other gang members in retaliation, which was, of course, endangering the public. And so there was clearly an escalation last summer and last fall into the violence between these two groups. What caused that violence? you know, you and I would probably look at that and go, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's feuding over rap music, it's feuding over girls, it's feuding over territory, but once one group shoots, then the other feels the only thing they can do is to retaliate, and they begin to go back and forth on that. And so our focus on this investigation was to find individuals that we believe may be responsible for those shootings and those murders, and to work with the homicide units, and to also find the prominent members of those gangs, and to indict or arrest them so that the gang can be disrupted and dismantled.
Can you talk about, with the RICO case, it's difficult from my understanding, and you've got to have significant pieces of evidence. Can you talk about, are you guys relying on wiretaps? Are you relying on video surveillance? What will you use to help, kind of seal the fate of these folks? Because a lot of them, as you mentioned, have been in and out of jail and have been able to get charges dropped previously.
Right, yeah, we're not going to talk about specifically which techniques we used during our investigation. We feel we want to keep that confidential because clearly we want to use those techniques in the future on other criminal organizations. So we're not going to talk in detail about how we did our investigation. Under the RICO statute, as you mentioned, if you look at last summer and last fall, the tremendous work that deputy sheriffs and police officers were doing, but they were being charged with one specific crime. And so then they were eligible to bond out of jail or be released. And then they were out on the street again. They could continue with their gang activity. They could continue to work inside the criminal enterprise. And it becomes that cycle to do that. The purpose of our investigation in racketeering is to bring all of that together, impact the organization with charges that are serious enough. I mean, when you look at these people's bonds, their bonds are ranging between $500,000 to $1.2 million. They may not have those resources to get out, and that also the criminal penalties for a racketeering charge is a first-degree felony. You could be subject up to 30 years in prison if convicted, and with some of their past criminal histories, they may score higher than that. So our goal is to remove them from the streets, keep them off the streets, and if convicted, make sure they don't recycle back into the community and continue their behavior.
So do you feel like you've shut down the Army gang and AFNF at this point, or where are you starting?
Time will tell. Unfortunately, whenever some people are arrested, there's always opportunists out there who want to try to step into that void. I think you can see the commitment we have up here between local, state, federal law enforcement officers that we do not want this violence to go back to where it was. And if someone tries to step into the void of that, then they are going to be subject to us coming after them just as we've gone after these groups.
I remember covering a case out of Sumter County, I would say maybe even 2 years ago, involving one of these suspects at a violent armed robbery that then was broadcast using some of our News 6 coverage on a music video, very brazen. Your reaction to using some of these crimes in the surveillance video, in the music videos, and how that could have led to these arrests? And then can you talk about how broad this was? If you can name counties, I mean, if I can tie one name to Sumter County 2 years ago, I mean, how far did these crimes take place across our area? It's a lot, sorry.
So I would just say that, when we see those music videos and, people in their community or some in the community are telling us they're fake guns, not real, we know that. That's not true. But yeah, all that information helps us tie these investigations together. And that's why we're all here. We got local, state, and federal authorities here because it goes beyond just Orange County, all across Central Florida and Osceola County and other counties as well. That's why, the Attorney General couldn't be here. But that's why we enlisted the help of the statewide prosecutor as well because of the multiple jurisdictions involved. And I'll reiterate what Director Stucker said. There's always going to be people that in these organizations, because these are prominent members of those organizations, there are going to be people who try and rise up, but as FBI Special Agent in Charge Rob Hopper said that we're not going anywhere. This is what we do for a living. We do this 24 hours a day, and we will open up investigations on them. This isn't the end of it. These folks have decided to pop their heads up in our community and commit violence in our community, and we're not going to stop until they stop committing violence or they're all in prison.
Sheriff, talk about the So the preventive measures, because you guys did mention that they are using rap music to kind of influence the teenagers, like kind of the youth. So on that local level, what are you doing in terms of speaking to younger folks to kind of prevent their contact with these organizations or anything like that?
I can tell you, as sheriff, and then my time as chief of police in Orlando, and I'll speak for them as well. You won't find, and really all these agencies up here, you won't find other agencies that do more in the community than us, from basketball to barbecues to community youth engagement programs to teen academies. We have so many different programs for our youth that it's hard to remember all of them. So we're continuing to talk to our youth. I just talked to a group a couple of days ago and specifically told them to stay away from these gangs and violent people in our community. And what I want them to see, our youth, is I want them to see these folks that they may be used to seeing on the street. They're not going to see them again. Some of those folks, they won't ever see them again. And when you're talking about 30 plus years in prison, their life is effectively over. So we talk to them all the time about think about your consequences. Obviously law enforcement, even nationwide, and especially here locally, we have long since taken the focus off low-level offenses, focused on engaging with our community and really targeting the violent offenders. And this is a perfect example of this. We took all these resources and targeting the violent offenders in our community to make our streets safer.
Thing when we talk about crime line is folks will call in and they will be completely anonymous, given a number, and that's it. But there's this fear that they might be called back to testify against some of these suspects later on. So what could the message be, even if they're anonymous in the beginning and maybe they get the reward and you get the guy behind bars, but that fear of having to be called back to testify, what can we say to folks?
Well, again, any tip that comes in through Crime Line is completely anonymous. And remember, we've been doing a 9-month-long investigation, and some investigations even longer. So a lot of times, all we need is just a piece of the information. So we would encourage people to keep calling in. And Crime Line has never, ever given up the name of someone who wanted to remain anonymous. That has never ever happened in the history of Crime Line. So I can't implore that enough. Call with the information, no matter how insignificant you may think it is. If you believe one of these folks or anyone in our community has committed a crime, especially a violent crime, call 1-800-423-TIPS and you will remain anonymous, and it could help us save another life. It could help us solve the murder of some of these innocent victims here.
It looks like there are about 10 people who were arrested who, according to what you guys put out, are not affiliated with these gangs, and they're on drug trafficking charges. So I'm curious, have they just not officially been linked to these gangs, or is there a separate also drug trafficking operation that you guys were targeting in this sting as well?
There are 10 people up there that are not a documented gang member. There's one of the defendants up here, Jeff Jocks, who is running a drug trafficking organization. He is a documented gang member. These other people were part of his drug trafficking organization. The money that was made through this drug trafficking organization helped supply the gangs and went back to the gangs. So they are not a documented gang member, but through their criminal behavior, they were associated with, and it was benefiting the gang.
And I know you talked about financial crimes that could be coming up. Are we expecting those federal charges to be coming to some of these same people that we're seeing, or possibly other people as well?
So the short answer is yes. Some of the people that are already indicted or arrested may be facing federal charges. I can't speak to anyone specifically, obviously, at this point, because the investigation's ongoing, and there are others that have not been named yet.
Director Stecker, can you elaborate for us a little bit more, please, on RICO's use in these charges? The only thing that I kind of know about it, and maybe this isn't even true, but is that if you have knowledge of a crime before it takes place, then you could be indicted in connection with it. But is there anything else about how it's used in order to kind of like bring these charges against people?
Well, just having knowledge of a crime before it is committed, we would have to show someone had involvement or participated. I mean, it's not a simple knowledge. What racketeering does is, under the Florida statutes, they define what an enterprise is, or a criminal enterprise. Under the Florida statutes, by default, a criminal gang is an enterprise. It is an organization. And so what we're doing is we're not looking at the individual crime that one person may commit on one day. We're looking at everyone in a specific organization or gang and what crimes are they committing collectively to benefit the gang. And we can look back historically at their criminal histories as to what crimes they have committed in the past, and then also what crimes we uncover that they're currently committing, and we can bring all those together to show the pattern of what they're doing. And it's not an isolated event that someone committed just a crime of a convenience store this one day and walked away and that was it. But they're part of a group who is committing an ongoing pattern of criminal activity, if that was helpful to you.
Yeah.
Okay.